All right, let's talk about this article here from Aletheia on Cardinal Parolin and his comments on Germany. The article is entitled Pope's Number Two, Rome has already opposed new German decisions. Now, just in case you're not familiar, I already did a show just a few days ago on the German bishops intending to bless same-sex unions. And it was an atrocious document. It's certainly a heterodox document. It is completely contrary to sacred scripture. It's also contrary to the Magisterium and Rome's directives. And so it's incredibly problematic as far as a document. Some people have noted, well, it's provisional. They're of the opinion that it could be that they have voted in favor of blessing same-sex unions. However, they're not going to actually start doing this, even though there are already some in Germany who are already doing it, as the document admits. But they're not going to start officially doing this until the Synod of Bishops, and whether or not, or hinging on the Synod of Bishops and whether or not Rome approves of it. I don't see that, but that is one of the opinions out there, is that Germany is just saying that they're in favor of this, but they're not going to start doing it unless Rome signs off on it. Again, I don't see any evidence for that at all. I say at all. There could be some evidence from what I've discovered in speaking to people who speak German and have read the document in German. They said that there could be some evidence there in some of the language that they're using. But even then, it's still questionable whether or not that's the case. But even if that's the issue, even if the German bishops are saying, well, we're in favor of this, we're voting for this, but we're not going to do it unless Rome approves of this. Well, if that truly is the case, first of all, Rome's certainly not going to approve of it. So this was a waste of time. But number two, it was certainly a heterodox document theologically. So already there's a problem. Even if they never go about blessing any of these unions, which the document admits they're already doing again. But even if they don't, the bishops that were in favor of this voted for a document that is theologically heterodox. It's theologically opposed to sacred scripture, I would argue. I've heard others try to make an attempt to say that it's deficient, but not necessarily contrary to the church's teaching. I don't see it. It seems pretty explicit in its denial of the understanding that scripture presents of same-sex unions in Acts. So I'm open to being corrected there, but I haven't seen any good evidence for that. It seems still to be doctrinally deficient. And so even if these bishops don't do any of this, I still think that there needs to be some discipline. And I still think that there needs to be some very strong discipline coming from Rome. And I haven't seen that. Now, what we're going to see from Cardinal Parolin, it's okay, but it's not strong enough. You'll see why. And it really doesn't need to come from the Pope's number two. It needs to come from the Pope himself. Cardinal Parolin reiterates the position of Rome as German Synod approves blessing for homosexual couples. Says local churches can't make these decisions. The synodal way is making decisions that do not correspond exactly to the current doctrine of the church. And so here it's even admitted that there's a doctrinal deficiency here, said Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Pope's Secretary of State, regarding the authorization of blessings for homosexual couples by the German synodal way. Now, I saw some people latch on to some of the things that Parolin said, and they present Parolin as just indicating this is just kind of a disciplinary thing. That's not exactly true. He does talk about discipline, as we'll see here in a moment, but he is saying that it's does not correspond with the doctrine of the church. So he is noting that it is a doctrinal problem. So I think that vindicates me whenever I analyzed the document and read this thing and said, this is doctrinally deficient. This is doctrinally opposed to sacred scripture and what the Magisterium teaches on this question. So it seems that there's an admission there on that point. But it continues. Questioned by a group of journalists on the sidelines of an event organized in Rome by La Civiltà Cattolica on March 13, 2023, the Pope's right-hand man said that there would be a time for dialogue in comparison of positions between Rome and the German bishops. Why do we even need to dialogue about these things? Frankly, it's so abundantly clear. And it doesn't require any significant dialogue to know that this is a position that is false. Moreover, the magisterium has already ruled it out. Rome has already said you cannot bless sin. There doesn't really need to be any dialogue here. All dialogue is going to do is continue to give people the impression that somehow there can be an opening of the door to blessing sin. It's just giving people false hope. So the door just needs to be continued to be closed on this, and there really doesn't need to be any more dialogue on it. On March 10th, the German Synodal Way gathered in Frankfurt for its fifth and final session, adopted by a large majority, 93%. The text blessing celebrations for loving couples, which authorizes blessings for homosexual couples, but also for the divorced and remarried. The Holy See, however, has said in a very clear way, any blessings of homosexual couples, recalled Cardinal Parolin, referring to the note published by the Dicastery on March 15, 2021. This is the position of Rome, he said. So the position of Rome, again, according to this note by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, is you cannot bless sin, period. End of story. This note, which prohibited any form of blessing of same-sex couples, was at the time highly criticized in Germany. Cardinal Parolin also stated that a local particular church cannot take a decision which involves the discipline of the universal church. And so here's where some people have read Parolin and said, oh, see, he's just putting this in merely disciplinary terms. No, not exactly. He is saying that it does involve discipline. Absolutely. And it does involve discipline. But it also involves doctrine, as we've noted, right? And he himself admits that, because he says the German synodal way, or the synodal way, is making decisions that do not correspond exactly to the current doctrine of the church. So he admits it's both. It's a doctrinal issue and a disciplinary issue, which is true. It is a both. So I think that some people have kind of overly criticized Parolin here. Whenever he says a local particular church cannot take a decision which involves the discipline of the church. Perhaps he could have added discipline and doctrine of the church there, but he had already said the current doctrine of the church. He then confirmed that a dialogue and analysis would soon take place with the German bishops to determine if the reform is taking place within the framework of canon law. Well, I think that this is a pursuit that is just destined to fail, because you can't have in canon law the blessing of sin, right? There's nothing in canon law, that I should say, that would allow for the blessing of sin. So this is just a waste of time. Why even entertain this? Perhaps it's to try to accommodate the German bishops so that they don't immediately go into schism, because frankly, schisms are incredibly hard to undo. The vast majority of schisms throughout history have not been undone. And it could be that Rome is just doing everything it can to avoid another schism, but it seems that Germany is doing everything it can to push for one, even though they say they don't want a schism. But de facto, if you're adopting something heterodox and then issuing or starting to do blessings that are heterodox, that's certainly going to lead to a schism. But the point here is, why even entertain this? Again, I think my suspicion is, well, let's just try to talk to them and do everything we can, and then at the end of the day, we're going to close the door on this, even though the door's been closed already. We're still going to talk about it again, and then we're going to close the door again, and hopefully they'll just back off and not pursue this course of action. I'm just not convinced that that's going to work, frankly. And moreover, even if they don't go through with the blessings, should these men really be bishops is the question at this point. Because if they vote for a document that is this doctrinally deficient, the question is, should they still remain bishops? Now, ultimately, that's up to the Holy Father to determine. But I think it certainly can be argued that people who don't know the very basics, or at least don't stand with the very basics of what sacred scripture teaches about sexuality, probably shouldn't be bishops. The Secretary of State said he considers that the decisions of the synodal path did not constitute a rebellion, preferring to speak of tensions. Well, I don't know. It sure seems like a rebellion because in the document themselves, they explicitly note they are going against the discipline of the church. They are going against what Rome has decided. They don't admit that they're going against Scripture, but that is certainly the case. But they do admit that they're going against Rome and against the Magisterium. What do you call that other than a rebellion? It seems hard to just call that a tension. It seems like they're saying, no, we are in rebellion against the current discipline of the church on this particular matter. Even though the discipline can't change since it is based on a doctrine, they can't change. So I don't know. That to me seems like a stretch. Again, it could be that the German bishops are saying, well, we're not actually going to go through with this unless Rome signs off on it. And maybe from that perspective, Parolin is saying it's a tension rather than a rebellion. But still, for me, it's like, but at the end of the day, they're still adopting something that's doctrinally deficient. How is that not still a rebellion? It's from bishops who should know better. You know, it'd be one thing if just a random Catholic was in favor of this. You know, there could be a level of ignorance there, somebody who's maybe not well catechized or something. But for a bishop, you no longer have that excuse of, you know, maybe you're not poorly formed or something like that. You're not well catechized. You no longer have the luxury of that excuse. As a bishop, you have to know what sacred scripture and what the church teaches about these things. So there's no room for ignorance at this point. According to our information, the cardinal summoned a representative of the German episcopate ahead of the session, expressing concern about the lack of communication between Rome and the bishops across the Rhine. The text approved by the Germans provides for a probationary period of 3 years, and blessings can begin as soon as prayer of blessing, as a prayer of blessing is recognized by the German Bishops' Conference. Did you hear that? It can begin as soon as a prayer of blessing is recognized by the German Bishops' Conference. Is that going to take place only, you know, in perhaps in light of what Rome says? You know, so this is my question. Are the German bishops saying, well, we're only going to approve of this prayer pending the outcome of the Synod of Bishops? If Rome, for example, approves of this blessing, then we will approve of this prayer. But if Rome doesn't approve of it, well, we're not going to go through with it. That's still open. I'm not exactly sure where the German bishops stand on that. I would love to know. First of all, they shouldn't be entertaining this to begin with. But second of all, I would like to know, is this hinging on something that's going to take place with the Synod of Bishops? If so, well, that's destined to fail. Because, again, Rome is not going to approve of this, period. That is not going to happen. Rome is not going to entertain it. Now, well, I say approve it. Unfortunately, it is entertaining debate on it. I do think what's going to happen with the Synod of Bishops is this. I think you're going to have Rome allowing for a discussion on this question of Germany's proposal. And I do think that some of the bishops in the Synod of Bishops will be in favor of it. Others will be opposed to it, so there will be a debate there. At the end of the day, there will be a document by the bishops giving their proposal. I don't really see them voting in favor of these blessings, but let's just say they did. Rome is going to then look at the recommendation and knock it down in a post-apostolic exhortation. Pope Francis is just going to say no at the end of the day. So he's going to allow for a discussion on this. Some are going to be in favor of it. Maybe even 2/3 of the bishops. I don't know. But even if you do have that, it's still not authoritative in and of itself. It has to be backed by Rome. Rome's going to look at the proposal, and Pope Francis is going to say no to it. What then? I would like to know, what would the German bishops do at that point? If I had to guess, I think that they would just keep the status quo of continuing with these blessings informally. But they won't push for it formally. If I had to guess, that's what they would probably do. But maybe I could be wrong. Maybe they'll push it and they'll say, no, we're going to go through with this and we're going to vote on this blessing, even though Rome says no, and we're going to keep pushing the envelope. And that's going to continue to test Pope Francis's resolve. So it then goes to note the Belgian precedent. In adopting the text authorizing homosexual blessings, the Germans relied on what they considered to be favorable signs sent by the Holy See during the Ad Lima visit of the German bishops last November. The Belgian bishops had presented their text to Rome at the time and were less assertive than the Germans. The Belgians had insisted that it was not, strictly speaking, a blessing. However, the Bishop of Antwerp, Johann Boni, who was present at Frankfurt as an observer, stated publicly in the presence of the nuncio, apostolic nuncio to Germany, Nicola Interovic, that the name prayer of blessing had been chosen by the Flemish to help the Vatican a little. What? Prayer of blessing? A distinction without a difference. You know, whether you call it a blessing for homosexual unions or a prayer of blessing, it doesn't matter. It's a distinction without a difference. But Rome has, again, already closed the door on this. So, again, I think this is where Pope Francis really needs to step in and start imposing some discipline, even with the Flemish bishops. But, yeah. We'll see how it pans out again with the Synod of Bishops. I think at the end of the day, they're probably not going to vote in favor, the Synod of Bishops, in favor of blessing same-sex unions. But even if they do, Pope Francis is just going to knock it down and say, no, it's not going to happen. And so we'll be back to point A at that point, back to square one. And so what do we do at that point? Well, at that point, we just have bishops in certain territories who have clearly tipped their hand and shown that they're not standing with Scripture or the Magisterium on the doctrine of this issue, even if they stand with the church on the discipline. The bigger problem is they're not standing with the church on the doctrine. That's the bigger issue. So I don't want to limit this to merely a disciplinary discussion. There is a problem already with the doctrine.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. God bless.